Ivy Marlowe felt like a counterfeit coin someone was about to inspect. At 26 years old, she was a single mother and a night shift waitress at the La Sirena, a diner in Harbor City that always smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Tonight, however, she was not at La Sirena. She was at Solstice, a lounge in the Elysian district where the ice in the glasses probably cost more than her daily tips. Her roommate, Tess, had set this up, a blind date. Tess, bless her optimistic heart, had insisted this was a good one, a friend of a friend who was supposedly just a nice businessman. Ivy had come with nothing. Her worn fabric wallet was empty save for a single, crumpled bus ticket for the ride home and a photograph of her daughter, Nova. Her shoes, the best pair she owned, pinched her toes, and she was painfully aware that her jacket was not lounge attire. It was just a jacket, meant to fight the coastal wind, not to make a statement. She'd been sitting at the small, reserved table for 10 minutes, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. The air hummed with low, confident conversations and the clinking of heavy crystal. A waiter, whose suit looked custom-made, had drifted by twice. Ivy had finally flagged him down, her cheeks burning, and asked only for a glass of water. No ice, no lemon. She could not risk him asking for a credit card to open a tab. She belonged here about as much as a stray cat belonged in a showroom. The heavy glass doors of the lounge swung open, a revolving door of polished brass and dark wood. A man entered, and the ambient noise of the room seemed to dip, as if someone had lowered the volume. He was tall, dressed in a suit so dark it seemed to drink the low, golden light of the room. It was tailored with a precision that spoke of old money and new power. Two other men, built like stone columns, flanked him for a moment before melting away. Taking up positions near the exits, they did not scan the room. They owned it. Ivy watched him. He was not just a businessman. He was an event. His gaze swept the lounge, cool and assessing, before it landed on her table. On her. Ivy's stomach plummeted. This was it. This was the manager, or the owner, coming to politely, or perhaps not so politely, ask the woman nursing a single glass of water to leave. He was the one who would point out that Solstice had a standard, and she, in her $5 blouse, did not meet it. She began to gather her thin purse, her knuckles brushing the damp bus ticket in her pocket. He moved with a lethal, fluid grace, stopping at her table. He was even more imposing up close. His features were sharp, cut from granite, but his eyes were a deep, complex brown. Ivy Marlowe. His voice was a low baritone, smooth but with a rough edge, like expensive whiskey poured over gravel. She just nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with humiliation. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It did not warm his face, but it made him dangerously human. He did not ask her to leave. He gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "Dante," he said, sliding into the seat, "your date for tonight." Ivy stared. This was not the nice businessman Tess had described. This was a king, and he was sitting at her tiny, inadequate table. The chasm between their worlds was not just a gap. It was the entire Grand Canyon. The women at the bar, draped in silk and dripping diamonds, were watching. The men in suits were watching. Ivy started, her voice a croak. She stood up, grabbing her purse. "I'm sorry. I think there has been a mistake. I have to go." She could not breathe. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. "Please," he said, not a command, but a request. His voice was soft, but it cut through her panic. "Sit." She hesitated, halfway out of the chair. "Just two people talking," Dante said, his gaze holding hers. "No bill, no expectations, just a conversation." Slowly, as if pulled by an invisible string, Ivy sat back down. The waiter, sensing a change in the weather, materialized instantly. "Mr. Rinaldi, a pleasure," the waiter gushed. Ignoring Ivy completely, "May I recommend the 30-year Macallan, or perhaps a bottle of the Chateau Margaux for the table?" Dante never looked away from Ivy. "What are you having?" he asked her. Ivy flushed. I just have water." Dante met the waiter's eyes. The chill in his gaze was palpable. Then I will have what she is having, a glass of water, no ice. The waiter, flustered, nodded quickly and vanished. Dante Rinaldi, head of Rinaldi Holdings and, secretly, the undisputed boss of the Orion Syndicate, turned his full attention back to the waitress from the La Serena. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the distant murmur of the lounge. Ivy was surprised to find the silence was not uncomfortable. It was just watchful. Before she could think of something to say, a new voice interrupted, thick and slurred. Well, look at this. A man, his face flushed with alcohol and entitlement, was leaning over their table. He was in his 50s, wearing a suit that was expensive but poorly fitted. "Some people just do not know their place," the man sneered, his eyes raking over Ivy's jacket. "This is the Elysian District. Sweetheart, you lost the bus station is 3 blocks south." Ivy froze, the old, familiar sting of class-based contempt hitting her. She instinctively started to shrink, to make herself small, a tactic she had perfected. Dante did not look at the man. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed one large, steady hand on the back of Ivy's empty chair. The motion was protective, proprietary. "She is exactly where she belongs," Dante said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. But this whisper was colder than a Harbor City winter. It was the sound of a blade being unsheathed. "You, however, are interrupting. I suggest you find your way back to wherever it is you came from, now." The man paled. He recognized the tone, if not the man. He saw the danger he was in. Even if he did not understand it, he muttered an apology, stumbling backward, and quickly disappeared into the crowd. Dante removed his hand from her chair and leaned back, as if nothing had happened. Ivy let out a breath she had been holding. "Thank you." For what he asked, as if the encounter was beneath his notice. He gestured to her hands, which were now gripping her water glass. "Tess mentioned you are a waitress, La Serena. That is a late shift." Ivy blinked, thrown by the sudden, normal question. "Yes, I work the overnight, 10 until 6 in the morning." "That must be difficult with a daughter," he said. Ivy's defenses snapped back up. "How did you know about Nova?" "I asked Tess about the person I was meeting." He said simply, without apology. "She said you have a 6-year-old and that you paint." This was the last thing she expected. He had not asked about her sign, her favorite movie, or any other banal blind date trivia. He had asked about the things that defined her. Yes, Ivy said, a little of her tension easing. "Nova is my world. The painting, that is just something I do on the side. Murals, mostly. For community centers, when I can—" "Why murals?" he asked. "Because they are big," Ivy said, surprising herself with the honesty. "They take up space. No one can ignore them. They are for everyone, not just for people who can afford to put them in a house." Dante watched her, his expression unreadable, but his attention was total. It was a powerful, unnerving feeling. He listened like it was his profession. Just as she was about to ask him a question, his phone, which was face down on the table, gave a single, silent vibration. He glanced at the screen. Ivy, upside down, could only see a string of random characters, but the intensity of his focus sharpened for a second. It was an encrypted message, a shootout at the Raven Cove docks. One of his lieutenants was pinned down. The Marrow Street crew was getting bold. Dante's thumb hovered over the reply. He could be at the docks in 15 minutes, but he looked at the woman across from him, a woman who looked at the world with the wary eyes of a fighter, but spoke about painting with the heart of a poet. He slid the phone back into his pocket, silencing it. The storm at Raven Cove could wait. "I have to choose to stay," he said, more to himself than to her. 12 more minutes. Ivy looked confused. "What?" "Nothing." He offered a small, rare smile. "Tell me about the mural you are planning next." But Ivy had seen the clock. "I am sorry," she said, checking her own cracked phone. "I have to go. My sitter, I have to relieve her by 9. She stood, and this time, he stood with her. The entire room seemed to rise in deference to him. "Allow me to drive you," he said. It was not a question. "No," Ivy said, perhaps too quickly. The independence was her only armor. "I am fine. I have my bus pass, but thank you. For the water, and for the gentleman." Dante studied her for a long moment. He did not push. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a simple, impossibly heavy black card. It was not a credit card. It just had a name and a number. He turned it over and, with a pen that appeared from nowhere, scribbled something on the back. He pressed it into her hand. His fingers were warm, his touch firm. "You are right to be independent, Ivy, but independence should not mean isolation." She looked down at the card. On the back, in sharp, angular handwriting, he had written, "If the world forces you to shrink, call me to make it expand." Ivy Marlowe turned and walked out of the Solstice, the billionaire Mafia boss's card heavy in her hand, and the smell of ozone and old money whiskey lingering in her senses. She did not look back. The cold air of the Elysian district hit Ivy like a slap as she hurried away from the golden warmth of Solstice. She clutched the heavy black card in her pocket, the embossed letters feeling alien against her fingertips. She kept her head down, walking fast toward the bus stop on the edge of the glittering district, desperate to get back to her world, where the streets were cracked and the lights were broken. A block away from the lounge, she felt it, a prickle on the back of her neck, the sound of an engine idling too slowly, matching her pace. She glanced over her shoulder. A black sedan, its windows tinted to an impenetrable void, was cruising beside her, 20 feet away. There were no other cars on this street. Her heart kicked against her ribs. A frantic bird in a small cage. She sped up. The car sped up. Ivy broke into a run, her worn shoes slipping on the damp pavement. She saw the bright, familiar headlights of the number 44 bus pulling up to the stop 2 blocks ahead. It was the last bus of the night. She sprinted, not daring to look back, fueled by a primal fear. The bus doors hissed open. Ivy threw herself up the steps just as they were closing, fumbling in her pocket for the crumpled ticket. She collapsed into a seat at the very back, her chest heaving. As the bus pulled away from the curb, the black sedan glided past, slowing for just a second. Ivy could not see the driver, but she knew, with absolute certainty, they were looking right at her. Her blood ran cold. The bus turned the corner, and the car was gone. She rode the 9 miles back to her apartment in a state of vibrating tension. The card in her pocket suddenly felt less like an offer and more like a curse. When she finally let herself into her small, second-floor apartment, the scent of lavender-scented laundry soap and the sound of her daughter's soft breathing finally unknotted the fear in her stomach. Nova was asleep, her small body curled around a threadbare stuffed seal named Salty. Her 6-year-old face was relaxed in a way Ivy's had not been in years. This, Ivy thought, this was the only thing that mattered. She kicked off her pinching shoes and went to the small corner of the living room she used as a studio. A large piece of butcher paper was pinned to the wall. Using a piece of charcoal, she began to sketch, her hand moving with practiced speed. It was her dream, a community studio, a place where the kids in her neighborhood could paint, a wall of their own. She added a new detail, a wide-open door. Her phone buzzed on the counter, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. It was a number she did not recognize. The text was short, brutal. "Do not get involved with Rinaldi if you want your kids safe." Ivy dropped the charcoal. It snapped in 2 on the floor. She stared at the words, her breath catching. Her first instinct was to delete it, to pretend she had never seen it. Before she could, another message buzzed through. A different unknown number. "This is the Bureau of City Integrity. You were seen tonight at Solstice. You can help us clean up Harbor City. Call us." Ivy backed away from the phone as if it were a snake. The BCI. They were the supposedly clean, the internal affairs of the city. But the message felt just as threatening as the first one. Miles away, in a penthouse apartment that seemed to float above the city in the Aurelian Tower, Dante Rinaldi stood before a wall of glass. The lights of Harbor City glittered below him like a field of scattered diamonds. Marrow Street crew, his head of security, reported. A man as quiet and solid as the marble floor. The sedan was theirs. They were targeting you, sir. But they saw the girl. She's now considered leverage. Dante's jaw tightened, the muscle feathered, a single sign of the cold rage building inside him. He had put her in danger. He had sat with her for 12 minutes, enjoying the novelty of her honesty, and in doing so, he had painted a target on her back. "Deploy the Metropolitan Security Commission," Dante ordered, his voice low. "The discreet team. I want eyes on her and the child. 2-man rotation, non-visible, no marked cars, no suits. I want them looking like locals. If they get close enough to scare her, you have failed. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." "And the Marrow crew?" "Handle them," Dante said, quietly. "I want the driver of that sedan to forget her face." The next morning, the La Serena diner was in the midst of its sluggish pre-dawn lull. Ivy had not slept. She moved on autopilot, pouring coffee for the last of the night shift workers and the first of the truckers. Her eyes were gritty, her nerves shot. Every time the bell over the door chimed, she flinched. At 5:30, it chimed again. Ivy turned from the coffee machine, a pot in her hand, and froze. Dante Rinaldi was standing in the doorway of her diner. He looked as out of place as she had at Solstice. His suit was gone, replaced by dark jeans, a simple black shirt, and a leather jacket that probably cost more than her car. But even dressed down, he radiated an authority that made the vinyl booths and linoleum floors look cheap and tired. He slid into a booth, not the one by the window, but the one in the back, the one with a clear view of both the door and the kitchen. Ivy walked over, her hands slick with nervous sweat. "We have a special on the pancakes," she said, her voice hollow. "I am not here for the pancakes," he said. His eyes met hers, and he saw the exhaustion and the fear in them. "I will have what you have on your break. Tess told me. Black coffee, 2 slices of dry rye toast." She stared at him. That was, in fact, the cheapest, fastest thing she ate. She nodded, wrote it down, and turned to put in the order. When she returned with the coffee and toast, he was waiting. "I'm here to apologize, Ivy." "For what?" "For last night, for the attention it brought you. It was not my intention." "I do not know what you are talking about," she lied, her voice brittle. "Yes, you do." He slid a small, plain white envelope across the table. It was not thick, but it was heavy, for the trouble. Ivy pushed it back. "I do not want your money." He nodded, as if he expected this. "Good. Then let me offer something else." He leaned forward and his voice dropped. "Let me buy you a real dinner. Somewhere you choose, somewhere you feel comfortable, somewhere you can bring your daughter. My treat, as an apology for a bad first date." Ivy's heart was hammering. The man was a walking contradiction. He brought danger to her doorstep and then offered to meet her child. Across the street, parked between a laundromat and a check-cashing store, a man in a beige sedan lifted a camera with a long-range lens. He snapped 3 photos, Dante leaning forward, Ivy's hand pushing the envelope. The intensity of their conversation. He was from the Interstate Financial Crimes Unit, and he had just tagged Dante Rinaldi's new unknown associate. Ivy saw the flash, a tiny glint of light reflecting off the diner's window. Her head whipped toward the street. She saw the man lower the camera. Her maternal instinct, more powerful than any fear, flared into a hot, protective rage. They were watching her. The bell chimed. Tess walked in for her morning shift, saw Dante, and nearly dropped her bag. "Ivy," Tess hissed, dragging her to the kitchen minutes later. "What is he doing here? I have to tell you something. The BCI called me. They asked about you. They asked about the blind date. Ivy, they said they want to talk to you. They said you could be a hero. They want to use you. Ivy. They want to use you to get to him." Ivy leaned against the cold stainless steel of the prep table. The world was spinning. Anonymous threats, government threats, a mafia boss in her booth, photographers across the street. She looked through the service window. Dante was sipping his black coffee, watching the street, his face a mask of calm patience. He was dangerous. He was the eye of a hurricane, and he was sitting in her diner. But then she thought of the text call me to make it expand. She was trapped. She was a single mom with an empty wallet and a crumpled bus ticket, but for the first time, she had two different, powerful groups trying to pull her strings. She looked at Dante, then at her own reflection in the steel. She could run, try to disappear into her safe, poor life, or she could pick a side. She could face the danger head on, not just for herself, but for the chance to finally, maybe, change her daughter's future. She walked out of the kitchen. Ivy agreed. She met him 3 nights later, her heart a heavy stone in her chest, but he had kept his word. The restaurant, Juniper and Smoke, was not in the Elysian district. It was a small neighborhood bistro with exposed brick walls, warm Edison bulbs, and a chalkboard menu. It was nice, but it was real. It was a place she could have walked into on her own. Dante was already there, seated at a corner table just as he had been at the diner. He stood when she entered, and the simple gesture felt more respectful than anything she had experienced in years. He was in a dark sweater, no suit, no armor, though she sensed it was always there, just beneath the surface. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice that same low rumble. The dinner was, to her astonishment, normal. The waiter treated her with simple courtesy. Dante did not order for her, nor did he suggest the most expensive thing on the menu. He just waited. The burger is good here," she offered, feeling foolish. "Then I will have the burger," he said, closing his menu. He did not ask her about the men who had been watching her or the fear she was trying to hide. Instead, he asked about Nova. Does she like to paint, like her mother? "More than I do," Ivy admitted, a real smile finally touching her lips. "She is better, too. She sees colors I miss. She told me the other day the sky was not blue, it was tired gray. She is 6. She sounds sharp," Dante said. She is everything." Ivy hesitated, then decided to trust this fragile piece. "She is why I paint the murals, my new project, in the Yardlight district. I want to paint a whole wall of windows, all different, some open, some shut, some with cats on the sill, to show the kids there that there is always another view, another way to look out." "Open windows," Dante mused, taking a sip of his water. "You are not just giving them paint, you are giving them permission." "I'm trying," Ivy whispered. He was looking at her with that same unnerving, total attention. It no longer felt just dangerous. It felt like being seen. It happened in the span of a heart skip. The streetlight outside the bistro's main window, which had been casting a steady orange glow, flickered once, twice, then went dark. In that instant of sudden shadow, Ivy heard the screech of tires, a sound of rubber burning, of a car stopping too fast where it should not be. Before she could even turn her head to the sound, Dante was moving. He was not fast, he was immediate. One hand grabbed her forearm, a firm, non-negotiable grip. The other hand went to the small of her back. "Down," he commanded, not in a shout, but in a low, clear order. He did not shove her. He pulled her with him, a single, fluid motion, bringing her down off the bench and onto the floor, pulling her into the small, safe space behind the heavy wooden counter. He covered her body with his own, his chest a warm, solid wall against her back. The smell of leather and something clean, like soap, filled her senses. A split second later, the restaurant's front window exploded inward in a hail of glass. 2 gunshots, loud and sharp, cracked the air. Ivy screamed into the fabric of his sweater. Then there was silence, followed by shouts from the street. A car door slammed, more tires screeching, this time fading into the distance. Dante did not move for a full 10 seconds. He just stayed, solid and present, his hand on the back of her head, shielding her. "It is done." A new voice said from the doorway. One of Dante's men, who Ivy had not even seen enter the restaurant, was standing where the window used to be. Dante released her, his movements smooth. He stood up, blocking her from the view of the street, and offered her a hand. She took it. Her legs were shaking so violently she could barely stand. "I am so sorry," the restaurant owner, a small man with a mustache, was babbling. "I do not know what—" Dante was already walking toward him, pulling out a thick money clip. "You did nothing wrong. My friend, this was not about you." He placed a stack of $100 bills on the damaged counter. "This is for the window, for the new door, and for the trauma. My team will be here in 5 minutes to clean this up. You will not have to make a single call." 2 men in dark, unmarked uniforms were already sweeping up the glass. They moved with an efficiency that was terrifying. Ivy watched, dumbstruck, as they boarded up the window from a kit in their trunk. It was as if they had done this 100 times, a wind that never blew. "We are leaving," Dante said to her, his voice gentle but firm. He took off his leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was incredibly warm and settled on her like a lead blanket, comforting and heavy. He guided her out the back exit to a black armored sedan she had not seen arrive. He opened the door, and she slid in. The door shut with the heavy, final thud of a bank vault. Ivy sat in the plush leather seat, her body finally succumbing to the adrenaline. She was shaking from head to foot, her teeth chattering. Dante got in beside her. He did not touch her. He just watched her, his face a mask of cold fury. But she knew the fury was not directed at her. "You do not owe me anything, Massine," he said, his voice tight. "Except to be safe." "I hate this," Ivy choked out, the words surprising her. "I hate this feeling. I hate being protected." His head snapped toward her. "I ran away from a man once," she said, the memory tasting like ash. "My ex, Nova's father, he said he was protecting me too. Protecting me from bad jobs, from friends he did not like, from my own choices. It was not protection. It was a cage." Dante was silent for a long time. The car moved silently through the dark city streets. "Protection," he said finally, his voice measured, "is creating the space for you to choose. Control is taking that space away. I pulled you to the floor tonight to give you the choice to get up tomorrow. That is all." The car stopped. They were not at her apartment. They were at the North Glass Embankment, a high, lonely place that overlooked the lights of Harbor City. "Come," he said, getting out. She followed him to the railing. The wind was high here, whipping her hair. She clutched his jacket tighter. "Show me, he said. "What?" "The windows! Show me your mural!" Numbly, she reached into her purse and pulled out the folded, charcoal-smudged sketch. She unfolded it in the dim light of the city. He studied the drawing of the open windows, his expression unreadable. "My mother," he said, his voice suddenly raw. "She was an artist. She loved bright colors. She was married to my father. He was a monster, but he was not the only one. He was part of a system, a power that hurt people just because they hurt her. For years, she was trapped behind a window she could not open." He looked at Ivy, and his eyes, for the first time, were not hard or watchful. They were soft and filled with a profound, old pain. "I am crushing that system, Ivy. I am taking it apart, piece by piece, from the inside. That is the truth." Before she could process this, her phone rang, the sound a jarring intrusion. It was Nova's picture. It was a FaceTime call. "I have to take this," Ivy said, her voice shaking. She answered. "Mommy," Nova's high-pitched voice filled the air. She was in her pajamas, holding Salty the seal. "You forgot story time." "Oh, baby, I am so sorry. Mommy got held up. I am coming home right now." "But who is that?" Nova asked, her head tilting. She had spotted Dante in the frame. "This is my friend, Dante," Ivy said, the word friend sounding strange and new. "Hi, Mr. Dante," Nova beamed. Dante leaned into the frame. The transformation was immediate and startling. The coldness, the danger, it all dissolved. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. "Ahoy, Captain Nova," Dante said, his voice dropping into a playful, gravelly rumble. "I am the kind pirate, and I am telling your mother she has to come and read you a story, or I will make her walk the plank." Nova giggled, a high, bright sound that cut through the cold night air. "You are silly. You do not sound like a pirate." "Do I not?" Dante feigned offense. "Well, shiver me timbers. I suppose I will just have to let your mother go. You get to bed, Captain. Sail safe." "Night, Mr. Pirate, night, Mommy." The call ended. Ivy stared at her phone, then up at Dante. He was a man who could command death, who lived in a world of violence and shadows, and he was a man who knew, instinctively, how to kneel to the level of a 6-year-old and make her laugh. They drove back to her apartment in silence. He got out and walked her to the locked front door of her building. She started. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will be safe," he said. "My men will be in the neighborhood. You will not see them, but they will be here." "Dante." "Ivy." She handed him his jacket. "Thank you." "Good night, Ivy." He turned to go. As he did, his hand brushed hers. It was an accident, just a brief skim of his rough, calloused fingers against the back of her hand. It was not a spark, it was a jolt, a sudden, silent shock of electricity that made her catch her breath. He stopped, looked at his hand, then at her. He nodded once, then got in the car and was gone. A week passed. It was a week of quiet, unnerving surveillance. Ivy felt the presence of Dante's men, not as a threat, but as a low, ambient hum in her life. A man reading a paper too long at the bus stop. A utility van parked on the corner that never seemed to leave. It should have terrified her, but after the window, it just felt quiet. Then he called, not for a date, but an invitation. "Harbor Nights," he said, his voice warm over the line. "The summer fair. Tess told me Nova has been asking to go." And so, Ivy found herself walking through the neon-lit chaos of a pop-up carnival, her daughter's small, sticky hand in hers. Dante was on her other side, holding a giant light-up balloon. He had met them at the entrance, on foot, his phone nowhere in sight. He was not Dante Rinaldi, the boss. He was, as he had introduced himself to a wide-eyed Nova. Just Dante. Ivy watched him, fascinated. He was a man of profound, natural authority, but he knew exactly how to sheath it. He did not put his arm around Ivy. He did not kiss her cheek in greeting. He kept a respectful, friendly distance, his focus entirely on making the night normal for her daughter. He did not buy out the game stalls. He did not flash wads of cash. He waited in line with everyone else. When Nova won a small, $5 light-up balloon, a cheap piece of plastic that lit up, he held it for her with the same care he might a piece of art. He bought them popcorn and cotton candy, and Ivy realized, with a jolt, that this was the first time she had felt like a normal family in years. They were watching the fireworks, a grand finale over the dark harbor water. Nova was sitting on Dante's shoulders, shrieking with delight at every colorful explosion. "It is beautiful," Ivy murmured, looking up at the man who was holding her world. He was not looking at the sky. He was looking at her. "Yes," he said, "it is." The sound was small, almost lost in the boom of the fireworks, a sharp pop thwack, like a pressurized can exploding. It came from a food cart 20 yards away, a cart they had just passed. It was a warning, a trap, Marrow Street reminding him they could get close. Dante's reaction was instantaneous. He did not hesitate, did not look. He simply acted, in one fluid motion. He swung Nova off his shoulders and into his arms, pushing her against his chest, and then he turned, using his own body as a shield for both of them. He gathered Ivy against his back, his arm hooking around her waist, pulling all three of them into a tight, protected knot. "It is okay," he said, his voice a low rumble in Ivy's ear as she pressed against his back. "I have got you." His body was a wall of warmth and solid muscle. He did not move, did not flinch, just held them. 2 men. The same men Ivy had seen selling ice cream and running the ring toss, converged on the food cart. They moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency. The crowd, blinded by the fireworks, had not even noticed. The MSC team handled it before it was ever an incident. When the fireworks ended, Dante's men had melted back into the crowd. He gently set Nova down, his composure absolute. "Time to get the captain home," he said, his voice light as if nothing had happened. He walked them back, after Ivy had tucked a very sleepy, very happy Nova into bed. She walked out of the child's room. Dante was not there. She went to her apartment's front door. He was standing outside it, in the hallway. He had not crossed the threshold. He was waiting, respecting her space, even after what had just happened. "Are you okay tonight?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it held the weight of the entire evening. Ivy looked at him. The man who could command armies but waited in her hallway. The man who shielded her body with his own. The man who had made her daughter laugh. She was tired of being afraid. She was tired of thresholds. She reached out, grabbed the front of his shirt, and pulled him inside. The momentum brought him close. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing them in the small, quiet living room. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting a warm, golden glow through her thin curtains. "Ivy," he started, but she cut him off. She did not kiss him. She just leaned her head against his chest, her hands still fisted in his shirt. She could feel his heart, a strong, steady beat beneath her ear. It was not racing, it was calm. His arms came up, slowly, as if not to startle her. They circled her, his large hands resting on the small of her back, holding her but not possessing her. They just stood there, breathing. Her fear, her tension, the adrenaline from the fair, it all just dissolved, like mist in the morning. After a long minute, she tilted her head back. He looked down at her, his eyes dark and searching in the dim light. "If you stop," he whispered, his voice rough, "we stop." "I know," she whispered back. He lowered his head. The kiss was not a collision. It was a discovery. It was slow, supportive, a question he was asking. His lips were firm, warm. He tasted like the night air and a faint hint of the popcorn they had shared. His hand moved from her back, up her side to cup her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. It was a gesture of such profound tenderness it made her eyes sting. This was not the desperate, needy fumbling of her past. This was a conversation. His kiss deepened, and she responded, her hands unclenching from his shirt to slide up over his shoulders, her fingers lacing into the hair at the nape of his neck. She let out a small, soft laugh, a sound of pure, surprised relief. He stilled, pulling back a fraction to hear it. "What is it?" he murmured against her lips. "It is just," she said, her voice breathy, "this feels safe." The word safe hung in the air, a paradox given who he was. But as he kissed her again, she knew it was true. His hands were a comfort. His strength was a support, not a threat. They were wrapped in the golden light, a tangle of arms and shared breath, his coat still smelling faintly of wood smoke and the carnival. His heart beat steadily against hers, a rhythm of trust in the quiet of her small apartment. Much later, they lay side by side on her couch, still dressed, the dawn just beginning to paint the edges of the curtains. His jacket was a blanket over both of them. His hand was clasped in hers, their fingers intertwined. "I need to control my pace," Ivy said into the quiet, the words she had never been able to say to her ex. "I cannot be pulled along. Not again." Dante turned his head on the cushion, his gaze finding hers in the dim light. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "I will follow your lead," he said. The sun came up, lancing a beam of light across the floor. They were still Ivy and Dante, not owned, not conquered, just chosen. The peace of the dawn did not last 24 hours. The next morning, Ivy received an official-looking text message, followed by a phone call. It was not a request. It was a summons. The Bureau of City Integrity, inviting her for a brief, informal coffee to discuss neighborhood safety. The coffee shop was a gray, sterile room in a downtown government building that smelled of floor wax and weak coffee. There was no art on the walls. Ivy sat across from a woman with sharp features and hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her nameplate read, Agent Mara Keegan. "Ivy Marlowe," Keegan said, her voice flat, devoid of any warmth. She slid a folder across the table. "Not a coffee. You have been keeping interesting company." The folder contained photographs, Dante at Solstice, Dante at the diner, Dante at the carnival, with Nova on his shoulders. The last photo made Ivy's blood run hot with a cold, protective fury. "He is laundering money," Keegan stated, as if discussing the weather. "Rinaldi Holdings is a front, his real business. The Orion Syndicate is pushing dirty cash through a dozen cultural charities, including, perhaps, a new community mural program in the Yardlight District." The implication hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Ivy pushed the folder back. Her hands were perfectly steady. The fear was gone, replaced by something hard. "If you have evidence, Agent Keegan, then arrest him. Why are you showing me photographs?" A thin, humorless smile touched Keegan's lips. "Because we do not want the shark. We want the entire ocean he swims in. You are in a unique position. Ivy, you are inside his guard. He is compromised where you are concerned." Keegan leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Help us. We need to know what he is planning. We need to hear what he says behind closed doors." She slid a second, thinner folder across the table. It was not photos. It was a single-page document. "This," Keegan said, tapping the paper, "is an offer, a guaranteed scholarship for Nova Marlowe. Full tuition, room, and board to any state university. We have a discretionary fund for cooperating citizens. You plant a microphone in his primary vehicle. You give us Dante Rinaldi, and we give your daughter a future." Ivy stared at the paper. A future. The one thing she bled for every night at the diner. The one thing she could never, ever guarantee. It was the most brutal, effective bribe Keegan could have possibly offered. "You have 24 hours to decide," Keegan said, standing. "Do not make us your enemy, Miss Marlowe." Ivy walked home in a daze, the scholarship offer burning a hole in her pocket. When she opened her apartment door, she found Tess at the kitchen table, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Ivy, oh God," Tess sobbed. "They called me, not the BCI, someone else. The IFCU, the Interstate Financial Crimes Unit. They said I set you up. They said I was an accomplice." Tess grabbed Ivy's hands. Her own were icy. "They said I would lose my nursing license if I did not cooperate. They were asking about you and him, and if I knew about money. Ivy, they are squeezing me. They are squeezing us from both sides." Ivy held her friend, her heart hardening into a diamond. They were not just threatening her. They were threatening her family, her only friend. They were using Nova as a bargaining chip. That night, she called Dante. She did not use the number on the card. She used the one he had given her 2 nights ago. "Meet me," she said. "Argent Pier, in 1 hour." Argent Pier was a long, desolate stretch of concrete and rotting wood that jutted into the harbor, abandoned by everyone except the seagulls. The fog was thick, rolling in off the water, blurring the lights of the city. Dante's sedan was the only car there, a dark shadow in the mist. She got in. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the dark water. "They want me to betray you," Ivy said, her voice quiet but clear, no tremor. He turned his head, his gaze unreadable in the dark. "The BCI," Ivy continued, her voice flat. "They offered me a full scholarship for Nova. All I have to do is plant a microphone in your car, and the IFCU threatened Tess. They are boxing us in." She expected anger. She expected him to cut her loose, to tell her she was a liability. She expected the cold, hard boss of the Orion Syndicate. Dante was silent for a full minute. The only sound was the foghorn in the distance. "They are right about one thing," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I am compromised." He turned to her fully. "Not because you are a weakness, Ivy, but because you and Nova have become a priority." He did not get angry. He did not yell. He simply started the car. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You deserve to see the ocean I swim in." He drove them out of the city to an old, unmarked warehouse in the industrial sector. He led her inside, to a freight elevator, and down, deep down. The doors opened not into a warehouse, but into a climate-controlled, brilliantly lit bunker. It was not filled with guns or drugs. It was filled with file cabinets, thousands of them. "This is the Acanthus Archives," he said, walking her down an aisle. He pulled open a drawer. It was not full of cash. It was full of building permits, medical supply invoices, and lease agreements. "The BCI says I launder money through cultural charities." He pulled another file. "This is the deed to a building in the West End. We are retrofitting it. It opens in 2 months as a shelter for women and children. This," he pulled another, "is the budget for a free night clinic in the same neighborhood. We fund it anonymously through 3 different shell corporations." He led her to a large table. "This is the Orion Syndicate." He unrolled a blueprint. "This is where we were. Drugs, prostitution, gambling, the old ways. My father's ways." He then unrolled a second blueprint over it. "This is where we are going. Logistics, shipping, port security, taking over the entire supply chain, but making it gray, not black. I am choking out the old crews, like Marrow Street, who still deal in human misery." He looked at her, and his eyes were raw with the truth. "There was blood, Ivy. There was darkness to get here. I am not a good man. Not in the way the world wants, but I am pulling it into the light." Ivy looked at the files, at the plans, at the man who was rebuilding his empire from the inside out. "This is what they are afraid of," she said, her voice soft. "Not the crimes, the change. You are becoming legitimate. You are becoming a competitor they cannot control." "Exactly." Ivy turned to face him, standing in the heart of his secret world. "I will not be a part of a system that hurts people." "I know. I need a boundary," she said, her voice gaining strength. "A hard line. If I am in this, if I am with you, I need your word." "Name it." "No touching minors, no human trafficking, no forced addiction, any of it, and I am gone. And I will burn this place to the ground on my way out." Dante did not even hesitate. "That is my law, too. Ivy. The law I'm enforcing. The reason Marrow Street is trying to kill me." A new silence settled between them, not of fear, but of alliance. "So," Ivy said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading on her face, "they want me to plant a mic." Dante looked at her, his own expression catching her fire. "They do." "Then I will," Ivy said. "I will wear their wire, and I will sit in your car, and I will say exactly what you want Agent Keegan to hear. We will not lead them to you. We will lead them to Marrow Street." "It is dangerous," he warned. "So is a scholarship I did not earn," Ivy said. She pointed to the blueprint of the Yardlight District. "My mural. The BCI thinks it is a money laundering front." "Let's make it one," Dante said, a spark in his eye. "I am painting windows," Ivy said, her mind racing, connecting the lines. "One of the windows, on the far left. The building number on the sill. It can be a set of coordinates. The coordinates for the Marrow Street weapons cache you told me about." "You will paint it," he said, "and I will make sure they know exactly where to look." The night of the operation, and as Ivy had started calling it in her head, was a masterpiece of theater. Dante did not take her to his car. Instead, he took her to the Mosaic, the flagship club of the Orion Syndicate, a glittering, multi-level testament to his legitimate power. The place was packed, and, as Ivy knew from the subtle static in her ear, it was also bugged. Agent Keegan's team was listening to everything, thanks to the tiny, high-frequency microphone taped between her shoulder blades. "You seem tense," Dante murmured, his lips close to her ear in the thrumming bass, a perfect picture of a new couple in a loud club. His hand rested on the small of her back. She knew, for the BCI, this looked like an intimate gesture. For her, it was a grounding touch, a reminder that he was there. Just a lot of people, Ivy said, her voice a little breathless, playing the part of the overwhelmed waitress. Stay with me, and you are the only person they will wish they were, he replied, a line so smooth it could have been for the listeners or just for her. He led her to a private booth, elevated above the crowd. I will be right back. Do not move, he said, and kissed her forehead, a simple public gesture that sent Keegan's surveillance team into a frenzy of note-taking. This was her cue. Ivy waited 30 seconds, then slipped out of the booth and headed for the lavish, marble-tiled restroom. She went into the third stall. As planned, taped underneath the antique toilet paper holder was a small, magnetic key box. Ivy pulled the single key, the key to the service entrance of the Yardlight warehouse, where her mural was, and slipped it into the empty sanitary disposal bin. She did not look at it. She just dropped it. A mistake. She knew Keegan's operative, a woman disguised as a janitor, would retrieve it within 5 minutes. She returned to the table. Dante was sipping a seltzer. Everything all right? Fine, she said. Just needed to powder my nose. He smiled. Good, because I have a headache, and I want to leave. He leaned in, and his voice dropped to a level that he knew the mic would still catch as a conspiratorial whisper. This whole week has been a nightmare. I just want the shipment off my hands. If my logistics team does not get that truck over the Fairmont Bridge by 2 a.m., I am going to kill someone. Dante, Ivy whispered back, playing her part. Do not talk about that. You are right, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Let's go. I'm tired of this place. At precisely 2:15 in the morning, a fleet of black BCI and IFCU vehicles, lights screaming, boxed in a single 18-wheeler on the deserted Fairmont Bridge. Agents, including a smug Mara Keegan, swarmed the vehicle. Guns drawn, shouting for the driver to get out. They ripped open the back of the truck, expecting drugs or guns or laundered cash. Instead, they found 200 brand-new school computers, still in their boxes, each stamped with the logo of the Harbor City Community Fund. And that was when the second set of lights flashed not from police cars, but from the news vans Dante's team had anonymously tipped off. A local news anchor, live on camera, was already broadcasting. In a stunning move, it appears the Bureau of City Integrity is seizing a charitable donation of computers intended for Harbor City's poorest schools. Keegan's face, illuminated by the camera lights, was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. At the exact same time, on the other side of the city, the real operation was unfolding. In the Blackspire district, Dante's Metropolitan Security Commission, moving like ghosts, hit the real Marrow Street warehouse. It was not a shootout, it was a surgical extraction. They cut the power, deployed harmless smoke, and neutralized the guards without firing a single shot. They found what Dante expected: a dozen adult laborers, undocumented and held in slave-like conditions, forced to process counterfeit goods. The MSC team liberated them, handing them over to a waiting van from an aid organization. And in the back office, they found the real prize, the servers, the ledgers, the USB drives that detailed all of Marrow Street's financial crimes, including their list of suppliers. By 3 a.m., Dante was in his penthouse. An anonymous encrypted file was sent to a single, fiercely independent journalist he trusted. A duplicate, with all identifying information scrubbed, was sent to Lanternworks, a non-profit dedicated to exposing financial corruption. The fuse was lit. Ivy was waiting for him at his apartment, her heart hammering. He walked in, and she saw him properly for the first time that night. He looked tired. There was a rip in his shirt, and a dark, angry graze was visible on his shoulder, just below the collarbone. "You are hurt," she said, her voice soft. "It is nothing. A filing cabinet was bolted to the wall," he said, shrugging off his jacket. "Sit." It was not a request. She went to his immaculate bathroom and returned with a first aid kit. He was sitting on the edge of his sofa, his shirt off. Her breath caught. She had felt his strength, but seeing it was different. He was not bulky. He was lean, defined, and covered in the faint, silvery lines of old scars. She knelt in front of him, her hands trembling slightly as she opened an antiseptic wipe. "This might sting," she whispered. "Ivy," he said, his voice a low rumble. He caught her hand, the one holding the wipe. "You were brilliant tonight." "We were," she corrected, her eyes locking with his. She gently dabbed at the raw skin. He did not flinch, but his eyes never left her face. The air in the room was electric, charged with the adrenaline of the heist and something far more dangerous. Her fingers brushed his collarbone. His hand came up to rest on her waist, his thumb stroking a slow circle. It was a promise of what would come when the storm finally passed. She leaned in, and he met her. A kiss that was not a kiss. It was the barest, briefest press of his lips to hers, a touch, a shared breath, a seal. The moment shattered. A bright, tinny ringtone filled the room. Ivy's phone. She pulled back, flustered, and saw Nova's face. Dante's expression changed. The predator was gone. He gestured, "Answer it." He was in a high-stakes meeting, his lieutenants on a video call on his laptop, discussing the fallout. He muted them with a single tap. Ivy hit the button. "Hi, baby. Is everything okay?" "Mommy, I did it." Nova's face was beaming. "I got a perfect score on my reading test, 100%. "Oh, Nova, that is amazing." "Is Mr. Pirate there?" Nova squinted. Dante leaned into the frame, his face serious. "Captain Nova, a report, if you please. What was the book?" For the next 5 minutes, while his entire criminal enterprise waited on mute, Dante Rinaldi listened with rapt attention as a 6-year-old girl breathlessly recounted the entire plot of a book about a rabbit who lost his carrot. When the call ended, Ivy was smiling, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for that." "She is the priority," he said, his voice soft. He unmuted his call. "Report." His head of security's voice was grim. "Sir, we have a problem. The data we pulled was incomplete. Silas Brigg. He kept a personal copy, a kill switch, and he just used it." Dante's phone buzzed, a single text message from an unknown number. He opened it. It was a photo. Tess, tied to a chair. The message was simple. "The girl for the girl. Your whore in the USB with the real data. Raven Cove. 1 hour. Or she joins the harbor floor." Ivy saw his face change, the blood drained from it, replaced by a cold, white-hot rage. "Dante, what is it?" He showed her the phone. Ivy's blood turned to ice. "He has Tess." Dante was already grabbing his keys, his gun. "I'm going alone." "No." Ivy's voice was steel. She grabbed her jacket. "You are not. She is my friend. She is my family." He stopped, his hand on the door, and looked at her. "She was taken to get to me," Ivy said, her eyes blazing, all fear gone, replaced by a diamond-hard resolve. "You said I get to choose. I am choosing. I am going with you." He saw the same fire he had seen in the archive, the same strength he had seen in the club. She was not a liability. She was his partner. They locked eyes, an army of two. "We go," he said. Raven Cove was a graveyard of forgotten ships and rusting metal. Warehouse 17 was at the far end of the pier, a huge, dark box silhouetted against the polluted glow of the city. Inside, Silas Brigg, the head of the Marrow Street crew, was pacing. He was not a fool. He was a rat, and cornered rats are the most dangerous. Tess was tied to a chair in the middle of the vast, empty floor. She was terrified, crying silently, but she was unharmed. Silas was not a killer by nature. He was a merchant, and he was here to barter. He was streaming the entire scene from a laptop, not to the public, but to a single, private client. "You see, Agent Keegan," Silas sneered at the webcam. "The product is secure. Rinaldi is emotional. He will come." On the other screen, Mara Keegan's face was a mask of cold impatience. Just get the drive, Silas. And get the girl. The one Rinaldi cares about. She is the real prize. A car door slammed outside. Silas grinned and cut the feed. Dante Rinaldi walked into the warehouse, his hands empty, held slightly away from his body. The cavernous space was lit by a single, swaying bulb. "The dramatics! Silas," Dante said, his voice echoing, "it is beneath you." "Is it?" Silas gestured to Tess. "She is my insurance." "I am here, as requested," Dante said, "alone." But he was not alone. High above, a military-grade drone, as silent as an owl, hung in the night sky, its thermal camera feeding a live image to a small, custom-built receiver in Dante's ear. He knew exactly where Silas was, where Tess was, and where the two gunmen in the rafters were. What he did not know, until a faint scraping sound came from the ventilation shaft above Tess, was that Ivy had not listened. Ivy's heart was a drum against her ribs. She was crawling through a metal duct, the smell of rust and salt in her nose. This was a skill she had learned not from a life of crime, but from being a broke waitress. The La Serena's kitchen had a similar, ancient ventilation system that she used to sneak food to the homeless out back without the manager seeing. She moved, silent as a spider, until she was directly over the scene. "The drive. Rinaldi," Silas demanded, his hand outstretched, "and I will let your friend's friend go." Dante held up the small, black USB stick. "You let Tess go first. She walks out that door. Then this is yours." "I'm not stupid," Silas shrieked, his composure cracking. As Silas took a step toward Dante, his focus shifting, Ivy acted. She kicked out the vent cover. It fell with a loud clang. She dropped the 10 feet to the floor, landing hard, rolling, and grabbing the leg of Tess's chair, pulling her out of the center. It was the perfect distraction. As Silas spun, shocked, Dante moved. He did not pull his gun. He did not need to. He closed the distance in 2 steps and seized Silas's outstretched arm, twisting it in a brutal, bone-creaking lock. "The data is already live," Dante hissed, his voice a blade in the dark, all pretense of civility gone. "I sent it to the Lantern Works. If I do not send a recall code in 5 minutes, they publish everything. Your name, your clients, your partners." A shot rang out, deafeningly loud, not from Silas's men. "Drop it!" Mara Keegan was standing in the doorway, her BCI team behind her, guns raised. She had been playing both sides, and now she was here to clean up. "Drop the drive." Rinaldi. Silas, in his panic, tried to lunge for Dante's gun. Dante slammed him to the concrete. "Now," Dante yelled, a single command. The MSC team, hidden outside, responded. It was not gunfire. A series of percussive thumps echoed, and the high windows of the warehouse shattered. Canisters rolled across the floor, hissing, thick, white. Harmless smoke poured out, instantly blanketing the entire warehouse in an impenetrable fog. "Ivy," Dante's voice cut through the chaos. Ivy grabbed Tess's hand. "This way," she yelled, pulling her friend. She could not see an inch in front of her. "Ivy, I cannot see," Tess screamed, panicking. Then Ivy saw it, on the floor. A faint, glowing green line, visible only in the dense smoke. Phosphorescent paint. Dante had been here. He had walked this floor, anticipated this chaos, and drawn a map for her. She gripped Tess's hand. "Follow the line, do not let go." Outside, the pier erupted in sirens, the IFCU. Responding to Dante's anonymous tip about a major BCI trafficking bust, swarmed the warehouse. They charged into the smoke, expecting to find criminals. Instead, they found a disoriented Mara Keegan and her rogue BCI unit, effectively caught in their own illegal sting. The two agencies, already at war, faced off in the chaos. Dante emerged from the smoke, holding Silas by the collar. He did not kill him. He walked him to the edge of the pier and, using a heavy anchor chain, bound him to a mooring cleat. He dropped the useless USB drive just out of Silas's reach. "The old life," Dante said, his voice calm. "It ends here." He turned and walked away, melting back into the shadows just as the IFCU agents began to spill onto the dock. The armored sedan was a sanctuary of silence, speeding away from the flashing blue and red lights of Raven Cove. In the back, Tess was sobbing, a raw, broken sound. "I am so sorry, Ivy," she wept, her words muffled. "I told them, the IFCU. I was so scared. I told them you were friends. I am so sorry." Ivy just wrapped her arms around her roommate, her oldest friend, and held her. "It is over. You are safe. It is over." In the driver's seat, Dante said nothing. He drove, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror, watching the city fall away behind them. His left hand, steady on the wheel, was rigid. His right hand, the one he had used to pin Silas, was resting on the center console. Ivy reached over the seat. She did not say a word. She just placed her hand on top of his. His fingers, tight and rigid, slowly uncurled. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers, a grip of steel and silk, a silent, unspoken promise. He did not drive them to her apartment. He did not take them to his penthouse. He drove for 2 hours, north, away from the city, into the mountains. Tess, Nova, Ivy, and Dante arrived at a place called Willowmark. It was not a safe house. It was a home, a beautiful, simple house made of dark wood and glass, hidden in a grove of pine trees, overlooking a silent, moonlit lake. Tess was given a room, and she fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Ivy tucked Nova into a small attic bedroom, the child overjoyed at the adventure. Ivy found Dante on the main floor. She was in the kitchen, and Nova, blissfully unaware of the chaos, sat at a large wooden table, drawing. She was using a set of professional-grade colored pencils Dante had produced from a cabinet. "Mommy, look!" Nova held up her drawing. Ivy's heart did not just clench, it stopped for a full second. It was a picture of 3 people, drawn in a child's simple, honest lines. A tall man, a woman, and a little girl, all holding hands. Above them, Nova had drawn a sky full of bright, floating yellow circles. "It is us," Nova said, pointing. "It is me and you and Mr. Pirate Dante, and we are at the Lantern Festival." Ivy looked at Dante. He was watching Nova, his expression soft, unguarded, and full of a quiet wonder. "It is perfect, baby," Ivy whispered, kissing the top of her daughter's head. That night, after Nova was fast asleep, Ivy found Dante on the wide, dark porch. He was standing at the railing, looking at the black water. The mist was so thick she could see his breath. She came to stand beside him, pulling her borrowed sweater tight. "I used to think being afraid was a weakness," he said, his voice a low rumble in the stillness. "I was taught to cut it out, to never show it." Ivy watched him, waiting. "The first time I was ever truly afraid," he said, "I was 7. My father's associates came to the house. They were not there for a social call. My mother hid me. She pulled me under the massive dining table. She covered my body with her own, her hands over my ears, but I could still hear the shouting, the sound of glass breaking, a gunshot." He paused, his gaze lost in the mist. "She was trembling, and I was not afraid of the men. I was afraid for her. I was afraid of her trembling." He turned to her. "I have not felt that kind of fear since, not until tonight, when I saw that picture of Tess." Ivy's hand came up, almost of its own accord. She did not even realize what she was doing until her fingers brushed the faint, silvery scar near his collarbone, the one she had bandaged. "You are trembling," she whispered. He was a fine, controlled tremor in his shoulders. He caught her hand, not to push it away, but to hold it. He uncurled her fingers and pressed her palm flat against his chest, right over his heart. "It is quieter in here since you showed up," he said, his voice raw. "Even tonight, you make the world quiet." She stepped into his space, her other hand coming to rest on his waist. "Dante," she breathed. The porch was strung with small, warm string lights, the ones he had turned on for Nova. He pulled her closer, and they just stood there, swaying. It was not a dance. Not really. It was an anchor. He lowered his head. And this kiss was different. It was not a discovery. It was a claiming. It was a deep, slow, and profound, a kiss that spoke of terror and relief, of chaos and this single, solid center. It was a long time before they broke for air. His hands moved from her back, up her neck, his fingers lacing into her hair, tilting her head back. She let out a small, shuddering sigh. Slow, he whispered against her skin, as if reminding himself, we go slow. He shrugged his jacket off his shoulders, and it pooled on the floor. Forgotten. Her hands slid under his sweater, her palms flat against the heat of his back. The window behind them began to fog with their shared warmth, blurring the dark lake outside. Every touch was a question, and every breath was a yes. He kissed her jaw, her throat, the sensitive place behind her ear, and with every touch, a new layer of her armor melted away. He led her, not by pulling, but by offering, and she followed, trusting him, trusting the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath her hand. The next morning, Ivy woke up to a sound she had never heard in her life, silence, and the smell of waffles. She walked into the kitchen to find Dante, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, pouring batter onto a hot waffle iron. Nova was at the table, which she had covered in paper napkins. "Welcome to the Waffle House," Nova announced. "I am the restaurant. What do you want?" Dante placed a perfect, golden waffle on a plate, adding berries, and set it in front of Ivy. He was watching her, his eyes warm in the morning light, a small, easy smile on his face. Ivy sat down, took a bite, and felt a dangerous, unfamiliar sting behind her eyes. It was the feeling of a life she had never, ever believed she could touch. The bubble of peace broke an hour later. Dante's phone, which had been silent, lit up with a news alert. He opened the link. The Lantern Works story had exploded. BCI corruption and Marrow Street's human trafficking ring exposed. The article was a surgical takedown, filled with irrefutable data, timelines, and scrubbed. Anonymous testimony from the workers they had freed. It painted a picture of Silas Brigg as a modern-day slaver and Mara Keegan as his complicit partner in the government. By noon, the news was everywhere. Silas Brigg was a wanted fugitive. Mara Keegan had been suspended, pending a federal investigation. The BCI was in ruins. Dante made his move before the end of the day. Rinaldi Holdings issued a press release. They were announcing the Harbor Restart Fund, an initiative to reclaim and revitalize the city's struggling neighborhoods. Their first project, a $5 million community arts center in the Yardlight district. Ivy read the press release over his shoulder, her heart stopping. Artistic director, Ivy Marlowe. "You did not ask me," she said, her voice faint. "I am asking now," he said, turning to face her. "The funding is real. The job is real. Your vision, your rules. You paint your windows. Ivy, as many as you want. Will you do it?" She hesitated, the weight of the offer, the title, the legitimacy, all of it crashing down on her. "Yes," she said. The victory was short-lived. The IFCU, now shattered by the BCI's implosion and their own colossal failure on the pier, was scrambling. They needed a win, or at the very least, they needed a scapegoat. Her phone rang. It was an official summons. They wanted her testimony. "I will handle this," Dante said, his voice turning to steel. "My lawyers will bury them." "No," Ivy said, surprising them both. She stood up, her back straight. She was no longer the woman from the solstice, nursing a glass of water. "They want my testimony. They will get it." She looked at Dante, her eyes clear and fierce. "I will not hide. I will not lie. I will go, and I will tell them the truth. I will tell them about the club. I will tell them about the mic. And I will tell them how we saved those people from Marrow Street. I am not you, Dante. I cannot live in the shadows. I will stand in the light." The day of the hearing was a media circus. The IFCU headquarters, a cold block of federal granite, was surrounded by two distinct, opposing crowds. On one side, community activists and neighborhood leaders holding signs that said Rinaldi's fund is rebuilding us, a wave of support Ivy had never imagined. On the other, protesters shouting, "No Mafia whitewash," demanding Dante's arrest. Ivy stood in the center of the storm, Dante at her side, both flanked by the impeccably dressed lawyers from Cobalt and Sable. Nova was safe at Willowmark with Tess, but in the pocket of her simple, dark blue dress, Ivy clutched a small, worn piece of yellow chalk her good luck charm, taken from Nova's art box. The hearing room was packed, hot and silent. The live stream camera's red light was on, broadcasting the proceedings to the entire city. Or it was, until the moment the chairman banged his gavel. Suddenly, the feed sputtered. A cyber attack. Analysts would later say a flood of junk data aimed at the city's network. Silas Brigg was trying to create chaos, a digital smokescreen for his escape. The technicians in the room cursed, but the hearing proceeded, cut off from the outside world. "Miss Marlowe," the IFCU chairman said, his voice weary, "you requested to be here. Please, enlighten us." Ivy walked to the podium. She did not look at the panel of inquisitors. She looked at the crowd, at the journalists. "My name is Ivy Marlowe. I am a waitress and an artist." Her voice was clear, steady. It did not shake. "I was asked by the BCI to wear a wire. I was told Mr. Rinaldi was a monster. I was offered a bribe, using my daughter's future to trap him." The room collectively held its breath. "So I did it. I wore their wire, and I watched as Mr. Rinaldi and his team planned a sting, not to move illicit goods, but to expose the Marrow Street crew. I was a part of the operation that saved 12 exploited laborers from a warehouse in Blackspire. The BCI did not want those men. They wanted a headline." She leaned into the microphone. "Dark power, if it is pulled into the light, must accept the laws of the light. But the BCI was not interested in light. They were just another shadow." The room was utterly silent. The chairman was pale. "Objection," a voice cried from the back. The doors opened, and Mara Keegan walked in, not in handcuffs, but in a crisp suit. "This is highly irregular," the chairman sputtered. "I am here as a rebuttal witness," Keegan announced, her eyes locking on Ivy with pure venom. "Miss Marlowe is not a whistleblower. She is an accomplice, and she is lying to protect her lover." She slapped a hard drive on the witness table. "You want to know what Rinaldi is? This is what he is. This is audio from 3 nights ago, pulled from his car's internal data. He thought he erased it." She pressed play. The room filled with Dante's voice, distorted and cold. "The transport is confirmed. I want them moved by morning. No one sees them. No one talks to them. The Devermont group wants them on the coast by Tuesday." It was a setup, a fake, spliced from a dozen different calls. The implication was clear human trafficking. Ivy's blood ran cold, but Dante, sitting at the defense table, did not move. He looked bored. When the audio finished, he raised a hand. "Mr. Chairman." "Mr. Rinaldi," the chairman said, his voice grim. "That is a fascinating recording," Dante said, his voice calm, projecting easily across the room. "The quality is impressive, but I am curious. I would ask my technical advisor to check the metadata, specifically the GPS encoding and the ambient audio markers. My car logs everything." Keegan's smile wavered. A man in a dark suit, one of Dante's MSC team, stepped forward and plugged a device into the hard drive. He worked for less than a minute. "As I thought," the technician said, his voice amplified by a microphone. "The GPS metadata on this audio file places Mr. Rinaldi's car at the Aurelian Tower. However, the background audio, that is a train horn. Specifically, the 8:30 p.m. freight train that runs through the Blackspire district. He would have to be in 2 places at once." He typed again. "Furthermore, the shadow analysis from the file's video component. The shadows are pointing the wrong way for that time of day. And finally," he hit a last key. The file's watermark flashed on the screen, a BCI internal evidence tag. Keegan had not just spliced the audio, she had built it on a BCI computer. Sloppy and arrogant, she had been played. The forgery was exposed. Keegan's face was a mask of white rage. It was then that Ivy heard it, a small thump from the parking garage below them. Felt more than heard, a diversion. Dante heard it too. He was on his feet, but Marshall put a hand on his shoulder. You are not permitted to leave, Mr. Rinaldi. Silas. Ivy knew it. He was in the building, and this was his escape. He would not use the elevators. He would not use the stairs. He would use the tunnels. Ivy's mind flashed back to the warehouse, to the glowing green line on the floor, the phosphorescent paint. He had used it to mark his path in the Yardlight warehouse, and he would use it here. He would be heading for the utility tunnels, the old steam pipes that ran under the city. She grabbed her phone under the table. She could not text Dante, who was being watched. She texted Tess. Call the civilian 911. Now, tell them Silas Brigg, South Utility Exit, Pier 9. Civilian 911 inches was what Nova called it. City Watch volunteers, the network of truckers, dock workers, and night shift employees Dante had been funding for years. The ones who had received the computer donation, the ones whose clinics he supported. 4 miles away, Tess got the text and made the call. The network exploded. A port dispatcher saw the alert and hit a button, closing the automated steel gate that blocked the southern access road. 2 truckers, hearing the call on their radios, swung their rigs to block the alleyway behind the pier. When Silas Brigg, breathless and panicked, burst out of a steam grate into the alley, he was not met by a getaway car. He was met by a solid wall of steel. And then, stepping out of the shadows, were the dozen laborers he had enslaved in his warehouse. They were not armed. They just stood there, blocking his path. Silas, the great and terrible boss, looked at the men he had exploited, and for the first time, he was truly powerless. He was trapped by the very community he had bled dry, a clean, bloodless, and perfect arrest. Back in the hearing room, a clerk's phone buzzed. He read the incoming alert, his eyes wide. He walked to the chairman and whispered in his ear. The chairman stood, his face flushed. Ladies and gentlemen, I have just been informed that Silas Brigg has been apprehended. He was cornered by a group of union dock workers at Pier 9. The room erupted. It was not just applause, it was a roar. The journalists were shouting. The community activists were chanting Ivy's name. The chairman banged his gavel. Order, order in light of these revelations and the demonstrable corruption within the Bureau of City Integrity. This hearing is concluded. This body will recommend a full federal investigation into the BCI's practices. Amid the chaos, Ivy walked back to the table. Dante stood up. They did not hug. They did not kiss. He just reached for her hand under the table and held it. Her palm was damp. So was his. The storm was over, and they were the only 2 people left standing in the quiet center. 6 months later, Harbor City felt different. The air over the Yardlight district, once smelling of decay and neglect, now smelled of fresh primer, sawdust, and, thanks to Tess, freshly ground coffee. The Yardlight Arts Center was opening. It was not a sterile glass box funded by city bureaucracy. It was a warm, reclaimed brick warehouse, and the entire west-facing wall, spanning a full city block, was Ivy's masterpiece. Open windows. Her mural was complete. It was a riot of color, of hope, of different perspectives, 100 different views, each unique. The press was there. The neighborhood was there. Ivy stood on a small wooden platform, not in her waitress uniform, but in a simple, dark blue dress. The guest of honor, tasked with the ribbon cutting, was Nova Marlowe. She was beaming, missing one front tooth, and holding a pair of oversized, bright yellow plastic scissors, with Ivy and Dante guiding her small hands. She snapped the scissors shut, the red ribbon fell, and the crowd roared. Dante did not stand on the stage. He stood with the crowd, but his announcement, made the day before, had been just as transformative. The Orion Syndicate was officially dissolved. In its place was the Orion Cooperative, a fully legitimate, bonded, and insured logistics and port security network, in a move that had stunned the underworld. Dante had anonymously submitted files on his own captains who refused to adapt to the new legal structure. He had not just cut ties with the darkness, he had handed it over to the law. Next to the new arts center, a bright orange sign swung in the breeze, Tessa's Place. Her cafe was thriving, a warm, safe space with a dedicated children's corner, its shelves filled with books. That night, the center was empty. The crowds were gone. Dante took Ivy to the roof. The city glittered below them, a sea of diamonds. "It is beautiful," Ivy whispered, leaning against him. "It is almost too quiet." "It is just right," he said. He did not get down on one knee. He did not make a grand speech. He simply turned her to face him, taking both of her hands in his. "You said you needed to set your own pace," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, "and I said I would follow. I want to follow you for the rest of my life, Ivy." He opened a small, simple box. It was not a massive diamond that screamed for attention. It was a simple, platinum band, elegant and strong. He turned it over. Inside, she saw the engraving, 3 simple letters, IDN. Ivy, Dante, Nova. "He is asking, Mommy," Nova's voice shouted. She had followed them up, hiding behind the door. Ivy was crying, silent, happy tears rolling down her cheeks. She looked at Dante, the man who had been a myth, a shadow, and now was her truth. "Yes," she whispered, "always yes." Nova cheered and ran into their arms, a tangle of 3 people against the skyline. The BCI was officially disbanded, a stain on the city's record. A new, experimental department, the Civic Accountability Office, was formed in its place. In a move that shocked the political establishment, its charter demanded a community advisory board, and its first appointed member, nominated by a dozen neighborhood associations, was Ivy Marlowe. Their wedding was not a spectacle. It was held weeks later, at night, in the main gallery of the Yardlight Center. The only guests were Tess and a few of Dante's most trusted. The only audience was the wall of open windows. They danced a slow dance under the gallery's warm track lighting, his hands strong and sure on her waist, hers looped around his neck. They exchanged vows not in front of an altar, but in low whispers, promises meant only for each other, spoken against the backdrop of the art they had built. The kisses were sweet, deep, and unhurried, a celebration of the peace they had fought for. His hand came up to cup her jaw, his gaze total, and the story stepped back, leaving them to the privacy they had finally earned, the warm light of the gallery sealing them in. The new beginning was not an ending. A week later, Ivy was in her new office at the center, sketching a design for a pottery class. A simple, brown paper parcel was on her desk, no return address. She opened it. Inside, there was no threat, no bomb. It was a small, leather-bound black book, a ledger. It was Silas Briggs' personal copy, the one he had hidden from everyone. But it was not his list of clients. It was his list of sponsors, the people who had funded his rise, and the last page contained a single, terrifying name, one that had never been mentioned, a powerful, untouchable state senator with deep, documented ties to the Devermont Group, a corporation that owned half of Harbor City. The evil was not a street crew. The evil was a system. Silas had just been a branch. This was the root. Dante walked in, holding 2 cups of coffee. He saw the book. He saw her face. He did not have to ask. He set the coffee down and put his hand on her shoulder. Ivy looked up at him. There was no fear in her eyes. There was no exhaustion. There was only resolve. They had chosen to stand in the light, and they both knew the light demanded a constant, long-term courage. The story was not over. It was just beginning. The final scene, Ivy and Dante were outside, watching the sun set on the mural. Nova, chalk in hand, ran up to the last, empty brick section. She drew one more window. It was not complex. It was simple, and through it, she drew a patch of bright, clear blue sky. Dante came up behind Ivy, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He kissed her forehead. "We keep opening windows," he said, his voice low. A new, warm sunlight spilled over Harbor City. It was bright, but it was not blind. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from? Please let us know in the comments so we can all connect and share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, Mafia Boss Story, and like this video. If you enjoyed it, please support us by hitting that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.